Hello, I'm Crafty Patti, and today I'll be showing you how to make these wonderful, very popular, big, bulky blankets. Originally I thought, wouldn't it be cute to make one for baby and one for mom? Mom's always the one forgotten, right? When we're having a baby, so mom needs to get cozy too. So I thought that was a great idea. I didn't find the same color yarn in both, but you could do that. Make them both in the same color. That would be adorable. Now, when I started making the baby blanket, I found lots of things that could go wrong. So I'm going to show you the mistakes and how to fix them. In this one, I'm also going to show you how you change it up and you make a knit stitch. And then you change it up and you put in a couple purl rows to give it some design. So that's another idea you can do. And on this blanket, we just left it as being all knit. This particular blanket took 2 balls and this one took 4. This one took me about 6 hours to make. This one only has 22 stitches going across, and this came up really fast and only took me about 1 hour to do. Most of the instruction will be with using the smaller blanket yarn. And then I'll go into showing you how to starch your bigger blanket, but I'll also show you a different way that you can cast on and cast off to get a really nice finished edge so it doesn't curl. So let's start hand knitting with no needles. Blanket yarns do come in different weights. This one I've got on hand and I wanted to use it up for a project. So I'm going to be using this for the demonstration. This one is actually a super bulky 6. I'm using this for a baby, maybe possibly a stroller blanket. So that's why I'm going down to the smaller blanket yarn. Before you start your knitting, the very first thing you want to do is tie a knot in the end. Why? Because if you pull on this, you can see it just falls apart. You just keep unraveling. And you don't want that when you put it in the wash, right? So we're going to just cut that off. And then just tie a simple knot in the end. Pull it good and tight. Not so tight that it'll break, because it can break. And then just cut off close to the knot. That will secure it from unraveling in the wash. You're going to start with a slip knot. So just making a little circle. And then you're bringing your end through that loop. You can use your thumb to pull that up. And you're just going to bring these 2 ends together, your 2 loose ends, pulling, and you have made a slip knot. And we're not going to want our first stitch that big, so you can simply slip it up because it is a slip knot. And now for this particular yarn, I think I'm going to leave it probably just about the same width as my thumb. Once you have your slip knot made, here's the end of my yarn, and here's the yarn coming off my ball or skein. I'm going to place it just on my tape here, and I know that this is my 1 inch. I'm starting here, so I'm going to tape this down, and this really is working well for me because it makes for a more consistent chain as you go along, because you've got something to hold on to, and it's just so much easier. So here we go with our first chain, bringing the yarn through that loop, and I'm going to use my thumb to bring it through to make sure I've got the right depth. I'm going to push down on that little loop here on the left. Again, let's bring that yarn up through the back, using my thumb to make sure I've got that size I want, and this is down. First mistake not to make. Do not make your first initial chain too tight, because what's going to happen is it's going to pull in and it will be smaller. And as you can see, it's pulled in by almost 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches on this side. And again, almost 4 stitches on this side. So when I said use your thumb, that's not true. I lied. Oh no. And here's my slip knot, and I've made it so it's a thumb and almost a finger. So let's make our first chain larger than just a thumb. A thumb and a bit should do it. So in through the back and forming our chains again. Bring in our little loop down so you can see how big that next loop is. And then coming up again and forming the next one. Again, checking. And if it's too big, you can just slide it back again, just as long as it's bigger than just a thumb. And it might look big in the beginning here, but it will stretch out and should be nice and smooth, and it'll be the same size as your blanket. So there we go. There's our loops that you're going to be going into. Bigger than our first chain, but not so big that it's going to be floppy. The next thing you should do is count all of your stitches. So you're going to look at your stitches as being the bump on the top here. So I'm going to count. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to keep going, counting all the bumps and see how many I have. So here's 47, 48, 49, and the one where we're finishing up with our loop here, we're going to make that number 50. So I'm making this one as saying this is 50. This one here is now going to come up and become our second row. So we were working this way, and now we're going to start working this way. So this last loop is going to come up, and you're just going to pull it up so it's sitting on the top like this. And what you want to make sure is that the way your loop is the same side as where your yarn is coming off. So you don't want it so your yarn is sitting this way. You want it this way so it's coming off and continuing on. So here's our next row. You just want to force that up so it's sitting up like so. Now this one has come out of this yarn right here. So the next loop is right here. So let's come in behind, find that hole, and pull up a loop. I'm just going to go back because I'm finding this loop is way too big. I was just doing that for demonstration. So I'm just going to go back and make that loop smaller. That's probably better. And now I'll come back into my next stitch. So bringing it up, finding your next loop. Here's your next little bumpy loop. In behind, pull up, find your next loop, through the back, coming up. And you can see you've now made 4 stitches for the way back. And mistake number 2 is being consistent with the size of your loops and the size of your loops for the size of your yarn. Now this, I admit, this is the very first one I've tried in loop knitting, so I'm making the mistakes so you can have a perfect blanket, so you know what to do. In the beginning, I told you to use a thumb size for your loops, too big for this size of yarn. In the end, I was using loops that were more the size, even smaller than my baby finger. That works out perfectly, and it makes it look so much better. The first part of my blanket it was hard to be consistent because the loops are so big, and so I'm not getting an even knitting. Whereas with the smaller loops, it's much more easier to get a beautiful, consistent knitted pattern with your stitches. And I'm trying to give you a little bit more of a close-up so you can see the inconsistency of the larger loop here and the smaller loop here, which is so much better. And you can see here on the side view how much it will distort the side of your blanket if you're not being consistent with those loops. Here are my sections up here, which I like in the smaller loop, and how you can see where it's starting to bow out. So with this type of hand knitting, it's more difficult to be consistent, but it's really the key to making a beautiful blanket. So keep going, just looking for your bumps. And that's where you're going in. So you can just pull it up, find that hole from behind, pulling it up. Now carry on and go along your whole row here. And right now, this counts as 49, and your last stitch goes into your slip knot that you made in the very beginning. So that comes into here, into your slip knot, and I now have 50 stitches. And there's my 50. And here's our last stitch. And this one is going to become number 1 for our row going this way. Now, if you see that this is crossed over, then you can just turn it this way, and then your stitches will be nice and smooth with them coming both straight up. So that's how we're going to have it sit, just like that. And now we're ready to bring our yarn through that first stitch and form our next row. And there it is. You're forming a nice knitted row. Here's your next one. In through the back again, and pull up using my thumb, and up it comes. And here's our next one. Now just make sure that you find that when these are sitting, sometimes they might cross over. Just make sure that they're straight before you come through with your yarn to make your next stitch. And the next one. And if you find lifting it up off the table works better for you, then by all means go ahead and lift it up. And the more you do this, the more easier it will get for you. I'm just trying to go slower so you can see exactly what we're doing. And then continue on this row till you get to the end, again counting and making sure that you have 50 stitches. And I'm at the end of my row again. Here's stitch number 50. Again, this one comes straight up, and we're ready to come back the other way. So back through the back again, and let's do another row. There's the first one. Here's the next one, and I think you're going to have the idea by now, don't you think? I think so. Just make sure you don't miss any stitches and you'll be good. And the only reason I'm saying is to count 50 every time when you're first learning. You just don't want to miss any of these stitches, but once you get into your next rows, it's a lot easier. First 2 rows are the hardest. So I'm going to do a few more rows, and then I'm going to show you how to do the purl stitch. Just to let you know that I'm actually sitting down in a chair now, and that's quite comfortable to go along and do all my stitches here. When you're working to the right and your yarn is going to the right, I find the easiest way is to hold my yarn in the right, and I'm going to pull through with my left fingers. I just find that's the easiest. And then when I'm working to the left, I hold the yarn in my left hand and I pull through with my right fingers. I've now done 14 rows. This is what it looks like on what I'm going to call the knit side, and this is what it looks like on the purl side. So we're going to just change it up and have it so we've got the purl for a couple rows. And so as you know, for all of those stitches, we were coming from behind to form our loop. Well, this time we're going to come from the top and go down, and that is going to form our purl stitch. So now we've got still our yarn coming over this way, but this time we're going to drop it down through the top. So let's go down through the top and form our loop. Here's our next one, and we're going from the top down to form the loop. Same thing, pulling it through so we've still got the same amount of width for our stitch, and down through the top to the bottom, making our loop, and go all the way across in that manner. And as you can probably already see, you're getting your ridge of your purl stitch right there. So I'm going to continue on and go across the row, and there's my last stitch, and I'm going down. There we go. We've now completed a row of purl, so we're going to go back again and make one more row of purl. So it comes, your yarn comes up and it goes right down into that hole to start forming your next row. There's the first one. Here's your next one, and down. Next one, and down. And be careful, because sometimes if they're starting to slip out on you, just make sure you're not going into here. Look underneath and make sure you're grabbing your actual purl stitch from underneath, because these ones will tend to slide away from you a little bit. And here it is here. And the next one. And when you come back for your next row, just make sure that you don't pull those out, because they are hiding underneath. Just watch that. Now this is a good time to come in after your purl row and just come in and make sure they're all there. And they could be hiding underneath, so just bring them up and then go across and count and make sure you've got all 50 stitches before you start your next row. And now we're ready to go back and do 14 more rows of knit. So just like before, instead of going down, now we're going to come back up again. So let's pick this up, and we're going to go from the back and we're going to bring it up to the front again. And there's our next row. Again, from the back coming up. And carry on across your row just like you did your other rows. Just make sure that you catch all of those ones, and just in case they're hidden underneath, because they can be a little sneaky, those ones, and they can hide underneath. And when you finish that row, I would go back and check again to make sure you definitely have 50 stitches. What to do if you've looked on the back side of your blanket and you see that you've missed a stitch. Don't fret. We're going to mark this about this row here with a clip. I'm going to turn this over again. I'm going to place a clip on either side here, just so we don't lose our stitches on either side. I'm going to check back again to make sure this is the row that it's on. So I'm just going to flip that back again, and there it is. So we're going to take this one out, and we're going to undo these all the way down to the one that we missed. So we're just going to take that out, Take the next one out. Take the next one out. Till we get down to our mistake. And there it is. There's the one that didn't get caught. So now all we're doing is we're bringing those back through again, just like we do before. So through the back, bring it through the hole. Now we fixed it, and let's just catch the next ones. Here's the next one. Here's the next one. And the next one. And the last one. And now you're all put back together and it's all perfect again. So if you look on the back side now, we have now brought it into our knitting and it's all fixed. I have this much yarn left from my first ball, and I have ended in the middle of my blanket, which is okay if you're just working with one color. If you're working with different colors and you're creating a striped blanket, then do start your yarn at the beginning or the end of your blanket. And the easiest way to join your two ends is just to tie a knot. I'm going to go right over left, and then left over right. And pull on both ends. Don't pull it really tight because this can break. There's only a little tiny string inside here that's holding all the chenille in place. So tight, but not so tight that you're going to break it. And then just clip off your ends with a sharp pair of scissors close to your knot. And you're ready to go with more knitting. If you want to plan ahead and you're watching the amount of yarn you've got left in your ball, then know that for this size of yarn, that 3 lengths, the length of your width, 3 times will be enough to do 1 knitted row. So what I'm doing to fix this, I wasn't happy with the large loops down on the bottom here, so I started making the smaller loops. And I just continued on making more rows up here. I'm happy with the top part here, but I'm not happy with the last 3 sections here. So I know I've got enough. If I take these 3 off, I've got about 34 inches or about 87 centimeters by the time I've binded off the top edge here. So that's what I've done to fix this. And because we're going to take off these last 3 sections, and I'll be showing that in a few minutes, it will get rid of my mistake of casting on too tightly. Terminology is the same. Some like to call this binding up, and some like to say that we're casting off. For me, that's what I use because it makes sense. I'm casting on in the beginning and I'm casting off at the end. Now, all that talk about keeping these loops nice and smaller for this size of yarn, and now we're going to go back and make it a thumb size. So we're going to come back in just like you were going to start another row, but this time when we pull up, I want you to have a good size thumb. Now what I like to do is I like to come through and just pull up a few of them. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I find that sometimes when I go along, it's still just that little bit too tight, and I can adjust without having to take the whole thing out again. Now, to judge how far this loop should be, a good judge is if you pull this over and it overlaps your next stitch there, then you know you've got enough. That's a good test. So let's start our cast off. Here's our first one. We're going to take our second one. We're going to put it into that loop and we're going to bring it over. And that's our first cast off. Here's the next one. It's going to come into that loop. It's going to come up and over. Here's your next one. In, that lies flat. This one's up and over. Now, I'm checking as I go to see if that is still going to come over to my next stitch. If I start getting tight, I'm going to make these loops a little tiny bit bigger. Not by much, but enough to make it work. So I'm going to just do a few more here. And let's go by and make sure that we've still got enough. This one looks to me like it's getting a little bit on the tighter side, but we'll see. So in and over. There's my next one. I think we're still okay. In and over. See, it's just starting to pull up a little bit there. You see how this is coming and it's just slightly short. So that's going to start to pull. I'm going to take these last two out and I'm going to make this one just that little bit bigger. And let's try that again. So in and pull it over. Here's my next one. Let's do a test. And you can see now that it's covering my whole next stitch. So I know this is not going to pull. I hope that all makes sense for you, but I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. So I'm trying to help you out so you have a perfect blanket. So I'm going to continue my casting off and I will meet you at the other end. And here's my last cast off. In and over. And that's our last one. And here's our end of our yarn. I'm going to just cut that off. This comes through my last loop. And that forms a knot at the end of our knitting. So you just pull on that, not so tight that it cinches it up, just enough so it makes a nice edge. And then once you've got your knot in there, you're ready to go to just weave this in to the back of your blanket and you're done your cast off. So I'll just pull this through a few times. And back through this one. And I'm not going through my cast off, I'm going through the knitting of the row just below. Weaving back and forth. And that should be just great. And just cut it off, give it a tug, and you are done your cast off. Now let's fix the other end. Taking out the bottom cast on is a little bit time consuming, but hey, it's gonna fix our blanket, right? So once you've got this bottom cast on, undone, then your next rows will just rip right out, and I'll show you that when I get to that. And then once you've got your cast on taken out, then you should be able to just go along and take out the rest of it. Okay, well that was fun. I ripped out those 3 sections I didn't like, and this is my 2 purls. I've taken the purls out, so I'm going to finish on cast off. And so we're ready to do our cast off edge on this end, which was originally our beginning, but now it's another end. That's okay, it'll work. Again, just as a reminder, we're coming up and we're making this a larger loop because we have to have this big enough to fit over to the other loop beside it. So I'm just going to make up a few loops here. The second one's going into the first one. It comes up and over, I'm just exaggerating that. It comes up, but you just have, it's a reminder that this one is coming over this way, that's all. And so this one, in, up, and the next one, in, and up. And I will carry on and finish up that cast off edge. And I'm on my last cast off. And there it is there. Cut off the yarn. This piece of yarn goes through your last loop. Cinch it up. And again, you've got it tied off here. And make sure you tie your knot in the end of your yarn so it does not unravel. And then just weave through your end in and out of your stitches. And on the last one, I'm going to come through one stitch and then I'm going to loop it through and tie another knot, just so it stays in there. And you can just tuck in that last little end and bring it back down again. There you go, nice and secure. And voila, we are all fixed, yay! Well, I hope that was helpful. I made the mistakes so you could make a perfect baby blanket. And I'm happy with my final results, and I'm glad I fixed my mistakes. Now, I have noticed, just one more thing to fix, is that the edges here on your cast on or cast off do tend to curl. So we have a way to fix that, and this isn't my method. This is something I did learn from watching the Be Cozy YouTube site, and I'll write that in the description box for you. She's kind enough to show us all these great ideas, and I'm going to show you shortly how to work differently with that second row of knitting to prevent that curl. And this yarn that we're going to be working with now is a big, you'll see the word big on the Burnett blanket yarn, and it is a jumbo 7. And as you remember me talking about the size of loops to make for this type of yarn, it just doesn't warrant having those big loops. It just didn't look good, and that's why I told you to bring it down for your size of loops, because it works okay in this yarn. In this yarn, you have a little bit more flexibility, and you have the option to make really big loops and have a really airy looking floppy blanket, or you can go a little bit tighter and have a more dense looking blanket with not as many holes. This is a personal choice of what you want to do. I'm going to go somewhere in the middle. And same as the smaller yarn, let's tie that knot. And same thing again, we're going to start with a slip knot. And for these loops today, I'm going to work on having all 4 fingers being able to fit into that first loop. And let's make our chain like we did before. I'm not going to attach this one to the table because this yarn is easier to work with, and I think you'll find that as well. So here's our yarn coming off the ball, coming up through the back of that loop. We're going to bring that up and we're going to form our next loop, finding our 4 fingers, and I'm going to hold on here, and let's do that again. Up through the back, 4 fingers, and hold. Through the back, 4 fingers, and hold. And so far I've done 5. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my 5th, and I'm going to do 22 chains. Here's our chain of 22 stitches, and this is the side that you normally would probably want to do your loops. This would be your first one, and then your second one, you'd be coming in here to form your second loop? Well, I'm going to show you the other method we've been talking about. So what we need to do though is we need to turn this to the back side. So let's just flip this around. And then on this side, you're going to see these ridges right in the middle of your chain. That's where we're going to form our stitches, right into these little middle ridges, and that will prevent the rolling of your edge. Now, being that this stitch is going to be your first stitch, we're going to make this a little bit smaller because I was using my 4 fingers. I'm now going to come down to 3 fingers. I don't want this really big. So that's the size of loop I want for the rest of my blanket. There is number 1. We've already come out of this bump here, so we're going to go into the next little bump here. So we're going to come right into here and bring up a 3-finger loop, and that's our next stitch. That's our next bump right here and into here. There's 3. And be consistent with your size of loops. I'm going back and checking. This one's a little bit big. I'm going to bring it down. That should be good. Number 21, and here's my last one, number 22. There we go. And you can see the nice chain effect on the bottom of your blanket, and so that's what that has created by doing it on the back side. So now we can come back, and you know how to do this now because you followed me on the baby blanket. So now you're just going to come up and you're going to start your next row. So now we're going to the right and back in, and the same size loops. Be consistent. And there you go. You should be on your way now because you've already washed the baby blanket. I'm assuming you did anyways. And you now know how to pull up the loops and go back and forth. And once you're feeling comfortable about the size of your consistency for all your loops, and you can certainly go faster and just pull them out. And here's your last one for this row. And now you're ready to go back the other way again. And I finished my first ball, and just letting you know that one ball gave me about 12 inches, or that is about 31 centimeters. And again, as a reminder, I do a square knot, so right over left and left over right. I'm now on my 4th ball, and that's all I'm going to be using for this throw. So what I'm going to do is I want to make sure I've got enough to do my cast off. So I'm taking the end of my ball, and I'm going to measure out approximately 4 lengths, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm just going to make a mark here, and then I know if I get to this point, I have to stop because this has got to be enough for my cast off. I see that I'm almost at the end here. There's my marker, so I won't have enough to do one complete row. So now I'm going to start my cast off, and I'll show you a little bit of a different way than we did with our other blanket yarn, and this cast off will match our cast on. So you're going to take the first stitch and the second stitch in your fingers, and you're going to take your yarn, and you're coming up on the top and going down, and you're going to pull out a loop. Now you have one loop on your hand. You're grabbing the next one, adding it to the first loop, and again going down and bringing that up. You've now got one again, getting another one, and the yarn comes through. Again, 1 and 2 and through. 1 and the next one and through. And there you can see it's forming a lovely cast off like our cast on in the beginning. So I'm going to continue and finish up the rest of these cast offs. And I'm on my last cast off. And we end up with our loop here. So we're going to cut off our yarn. I'm going to tie a knot in the end of the yarn. And now I'm going to pass this end through my loop, and that will tie it off for my knot on the side. And then we're just going to weave in our end on the back. And then when I get close to my end of my strand, I'm going to come into my last one here, and I'm going to just bring it back and actually tie a knot in this last round here. Pull it out so you don't have it cinched up too much. And now that you've got your knot there, it's nicely secured. And then I will just come back this way and then loop it back through the last few stitches here for security. And there we go. We're all tucked in on the back, and there we are on the front.